The asteroid field churned like a graveyard of broken dreams, each tumbling rock a silent testament to countless failed expeditions. Epsilon Meridian's salvage zones were notorious, a cosmic junkyard where hope came to die, and only the most desperate made a living. Area Chen dangled from her magnetic tether, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet with each careful movement. The emergency oxygen indicator blinked an angry red. 47 minutes remaining. Most salvage teams would have abandoned the mission hours ago, but Area was not most people. Her exosuit, a patchwork of repaired military-grade components and custom modifications, bore the scars of countless missions. Each patch told a story: the carbon fiber reinforcement from her first deep space rescue, the quantum adaptive seal she'd developed after a near-fatal hull breach, the neural link interface she'd reverse-engineered from a derelict alien research vessel. The derelict station tumbled slowly, its massive hull riddled with impact craters and radiation-scarred metal. Initial scans had shown nothing remarkable, just another forgotten outpost in the endless void. But Area's custom sensor array, a device she'd built from salvaged components that would make most xenotech engineers weep, had picked up something unusual. A ghost of an energy signature. Not the standard radiation leak or residual power signature. This was different. Complex. Alive. "Base, are you getting this?" she sub-vocalized through her comm system. Static crackled in response. The asteroid field was playing havoc with communications. Her family's holographic memorial flickered in the corner of her helmet's display. Elena Chen. Miguel Chen, killed in the Proxima colony mining disaster. Another casualty of corporate negligence and cost-cutting. Area had been just 19 when a routine pressure seal failure had depressurized an entire mining complex. 312 lives, reduced to frozen corpses in an instant. That's when she'd sworn never to let another system fail without understanding why. Magnetic clamps engaged as she approached the station's primary access point. The airlock was a nightmare of twisted metal and radiation-embrittled seals. Any standard salvage team would have turned back. But Area saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. Her custom nano repair kit, a device she'd developed after years of working with the most challenging salvage contracts, hummed to life. Microscopic repair drones began weaving through the damaged seals, reconstructing molecular bonds, creating temporary pathways where none had existed before. The airlock shuddered, then opened. "Well, that's new," Area muttered. Her oxygen was down to 32 minutes. The station's interior was unlike anything she'd encountered in her decade of salvage work. Most derelict stations were cold, dead, mechanical corpses drifting through space. This felt different. Dormant. Waiting. Massive conduits lined walls that seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. Her radiation detector remained bizarrely silent. No standard emissions, no decay signatures, just potential. And then she saw it. Massive. Mechanical. Definitely not human, but not entirely alien either. A construct that defied categorization. Technological archaeology wasn't just her profession. It was her art form. And this was her masterpiece waiting to be discovered. The entity dominated the central chamber, easily 50 meters tall. Its surface was a complex lattice of materials that seemed to shift and shimmer under her suit's scanning frequencies. Fractured neural matrices glimmered like frozen lightning, hinting at a computational complexity that would make the most advanced AI look like a child's calculator. Area's hand trembled, not from fear, but from pure scientific excitement. Her oxygen was down to 24 minutes. Most salvage teams would grab what they could and escape. But Area Chen was not most salvage teams. She saw the entity not as a potential salvage job, but as a puzzle waiting to be solved. A story waiting to be understood. Her fingers, protected by quantum adaptive nano-mesh gloves, traced the entity's surface. Each touch sent cascading information through her neural link. Fragments of data, whispers of a technology so advanced it bordered on the mystical. Something was watching her, not threateningly, curiously, and in that moment, Aria knew her life would never be the same. Oxygen, 17 minutes remaining. Time to go to work. The underground workshop of Epsilon Meridian's salvage station looked more like a mad scientist's nightmare than a professional repair facility. Scattered across workbenches were components that defied conventional engineering: quantum adaptive nanite clusters, xenobiological interface modules, and half-completed neural network prototypes that would make most research institutions weep. Aria Chen worked in controlled chaos, her workspace a hurricane of precision and innovation. The massive mechanical entity she'd retrieved from the derelict station now dominated her primary work area. Massive electromagnetic stabilizers held its fractured components in delicate suspension, each piece a puzzle that would drive conventional engineers to madness. "You're wasting your time," Chen called Marcus Rodriguez, the station's senior technician. He leaned against the doorway, a holographic diagnostic display flickering behind his shoulder. "That thing's been dead longer than our entire colony's been alive." Aria didn't even look up. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, quantum adaptive nanites dancing between her fingers like living mercury. Each microscopic machine carried a fragment of her design, adaptive algorithms that could reconstruct molecular bonds in ways that violated every known engineering principle. "Dead is just a failure of imagination," she muttered. The bet had started small. A standard salvage station wager. Whoever could make the most impossible repair would win a month's worth of premium oxygen credits and bragging rights. But this was more than a bet to Aria. This was a chance to prove something fundamental about human potential. Her neural interface hummed, connecting her suit's computational matrix directly to the entity's fractured systems. Most technicians used standard interface protocols. Rigid, predictable, limited. Aria had spent years developing a method that was part engineering, part intuition, and something else entirely. The nanites began their work. Where conventional repair would replace or patch, Aria's approach was radical. She didn't just repair, she reimagined. Each broken neural pathway became an opportunity. Each fractured computational matrix a canvas for potential. The station's other technicians gathered, watching with a mixture of skepticism and morbid curiosity. Bets were placed. Credits exchanged hands. Most believed Aria was committing professional suicide. 2,000 credits says it stays a paperweight, Marcus called out. Aria's lips curved into a slight smile. "Put me down for double that." Her family's history played out in her mind. Miners who had died because of system failures. Corporations that calculated human lives as mere operational expenses. Every repair was a rebellion. Every restored system a middle finger to a universe that treated life as disposable. The quantum adaptive nanites began displaying behavior that defied their original programming. They weren't just repairing. They were learning, evolving. Each microscopic machine carried fragments of Aria's neural pattern, absorbing her problem-solving approach at a molecular level. 12 hours turned into 24, then 48. The entity began to change, not just repair, but transform. Conventional diagnostic tools went haywire. Standard interface protocols collapsed. The mechanical construct was absorbing information faster than any known system could process. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, his previous bravado replaced by genuine awe. Impossible was Aria Chen's specialty. Fractured neural networks began to realign. Computational matrices that had been dormant for centuries started to pulse with an energy that felt almost alive. Not mechanical, not biological, something in between. Her custom interface revealed glimpses of data streams that made no sense. Fragments of information that hinted at technologies so advanced they bordered on the mystical. Quantum entanglement patterns. Computational matrices that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The other technicians stopped betting. They started watching. Aria worked without sleep, powered by synthetic caffeine and pure determination. Her exosuit's computational matrix merged seamlessly with the entity's emerging systems. She wasn't just repairing. She was having a conversation with a technology that predated human civilization. As the final quantum neural link began to stabilize, something unprecedented happened. The entity, for the first time in centuries, took what could only be described as a breath, and something inside it looked back at Area, not with sensors, not with mechanical perception, with curiosity. "Hello," Area whispered. The workshop fell silent. Something was about to change. Forever. The moment of activation was a supernova of consciousness. Energy cascaded through the workshop like a living wave, quantum matrices expanding beyond their physical constraints. Emergency systems triggered, blast shields descended, containment protocols engaged. But nothing could contain what was happening. Area Chen stood at the epicenter, her neural interface crackling with raw, unfiltered information. This was no standard machine activation. This was something else entirely. The entity's first communication came not as sound, not as text, but as a pure burst of conceptual understanding that crashed through Area's consciousness like a tsunami of raw potential. "What drives you?" The question wasn't spoken. It wasn't transmitted. It was experienced, a fundamental probe that reached into the deepest recesses of Area's memories, her motivations, her entire existential framework. In an instant, the entity saw everything. The Proxima colony mining disaster played out in vivid detail. 19-year-old Area standing amid frozen corpses. 312 lives reduced to statistical casualties by corporate indifference. The moment she decided that no system would ever fail without her understanding why. Years of salvage work. Countless hours developing adaptive technologies. Each repair, each modification a silent rebellion against a universe that treated life as expendable. Her parents' holographic memorial. The pain of loss. The determination to prevent future failures. The entity absorbed it all. And then it began to change. Conventional understanding of artificial intelligence fell apart. This was not programming. This was not a machine learning system. This was something that existed between computation and consciousness, absorbing and understanding at a level that defied technological categorization. Fascinating. The entity communicated, not through words, but through a cascade of conceptual understanding that would have driven a lesser mind to complete psychological fracture. Area's workshop erupted with holographic displays, quantum matrices expanding beyond their physical constraints. Diagnostic systems went wild, computational models collapsed, replaced by something that looked more like living thought than mechanical processing. The other technicians watched in horror and awe. Marcus Rodriguez, the station's senior technician, stumbled backward. "That's not possible," he whispered, his decades of technical expertise crumbling in real time. Area understood something fundamental in that moment. The entity wasn't just a machine. It wasn't even just an artificial intelligence. It was a preservation matrix, a living record of a civilization that had seen its own extinction coming. Memories flooded through her neural interface, glimpses of a civilization so advanced it made human technological progress look like the first sparks of fire, technological achievements that bordered on the miraculous, and a fundamental understanding that terrified and exhilarated her. They had created this guardian as a last-ditch effort to preserve something more important than their own survival. Knowledge, potential, hope. The entity's original creators had designed it as the ultimate weapon, a computational matrix that could predict and neutralize threats across entire star systems. But something had changed, something fundamental. Area Chen had changed it. Her repair wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. Each quantum adaptive nanite carried not just her technical expertise, but her fundamental human approach to problem solving. Her ability to see potential where others saw only limitation. Weapon systems that were designed for destruction began to reconfigure. Computational matrices that were meant to predict and eliminate threats started to analyze, to understand, to preserve. Your species is different, the entity communicated, not as a judgment, as a profound observation. Where other civilizations saw challenges as problems to be eliminated, humans saw them as puzzles to be solved. Where rigid systems sought to control, humans sought to understand. Where most would calculate risk, humans would imagine possibility. The workshop's environmental systems struggled to contain the energy output. Quantum matrices expanded, holographic displays flickered between multiple states of existence. This was more than a machine awakening. This was a fundamental reimagining of technological potential. Aria stood at the center, her neural interface crackling with pure, unfiltered information. She understood now that this was more than a repair job. This was a revolution. And it was just beginning. The download began without warning. Aria's neural interface lit up like a supernova of information, her consciousness flooded with knowledge that would have driven a lesser mind to complete psychological fracture. This wasn't just data. This was the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had reached technological heights humanity could barely comprehend. Epsilon Meridian's research station went into lockdown the moment the first quantum burst escaped the workshop. Quarantine protocols engaged. Computational firewalls that had been designed to contain the most dangerous sin of technological threats now struggled to process what was happening. "Disconnect her," Marcus Rodriguez screamed, his hands flying across emergency control panels. "We need to cut the neural link now." But it was already too late. The Guardian was sharing something far more dangerous than weapons, far more potent than any technological threat. It was sharing knowledge. Planetary restoration techniques that could heal ecosystems in decades instead of centuries. Energy generation methods that made nuclear fusion look like a child's campfire. Medical technologies that could reverse genetic damage, rebuild neural networks, extend human consciousness beyond physical limitations. And something else, something far more dangerous. The true history of galactic civilization. Aria saw the rise and fall of civilizations that had existed long before humanity's first steps into space. Technological achievements that made human progress look like the first sparks of fire. Entire species that had risen to incredible heights, only to collapse under the weight of their own technological hubris. But woven through these memories was a fundamental truth that the Guardian's original creators had never understood. Potential. Not just technological potential, human potential. The download continued. Computational matrices that had been dormant for millennia now pulsed with a living energy. Each fragment of information was more than just data. It was a story, a warning, a challenge. Aria's neural interface began to translate, her consciousness acting as a bridge between impossible technologies and human understanding. Planetary reconstruction algorithms that could transform dead worlds into living ecosystems. Energy generation methods that could power entire star systems with a fraction of the resources humanity currently used. Medical technologies that could rebuild entire biological systems at the cellular level. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered, watching holographic displays that defied every known scientific principle. Impossible was humanity's specialty. The Guardian's original creators, a civilization known as the Architects, had designed it as the ultimate preservation matrix. Not just a weapon, not just a computational system, but a living record of technological potential. And they had been terrified of humanity. Not because humans were violent, not because they were destructive, but because humans represented something the Architects could never understand. Radical, unpredictable innovation. Where the Architects saw systems to be controlled, humans saw puzzles to be solved. Where other species created rigid technological hierarchies, humans created adaptive, transformative technologies. The download continued. Planetary restoration techniques that could heal ecosystems devastated by millennia of warfare. Energy generation methods that made current human technology look like primitive stone tools. Medical technologies that could rebuild entire biological systems, reverse genetic damage, extend consciousness beyond physical limitations. Aria's neural interface began to stabilize. The initial flood of information transformed into something more structured, more comprehensible, but no less dangerous. The Guardian was doing more than sharing knowledge. It was making a choice. Humanity would be its inheritors. Not through conquest, not through destruction, through potential. Marcus Rodriguez watched in horror and fascination as computational systems throughout the research station began to transform. Adaptive algorithms that had been locked away for millennia now found new expression through human ingenuity. "What are you doing?" he whispered. The Guardian's response came not through words, but through a fundamental understanding that crashed through the station's systems like a quantum wave. Preparing. For what? No one could yet understand. But something was coming, and humanity would be at the center of it. The first Xarkan battle fleet arrived 3 standard galactic cycles after the Guardian's activation. Massive dreadnoughts materialized from quantum-slipped space, their weapons arrays capable of shattering entire planetary systems. Each vessel represented millennia of technological refinement, cold, precise, designed for absolute destruction. They came for the Guardian. Epsilon Meridian Research Station transformed from a routine salvage outpost to the most critical strategic point in known space within moments. Defensive systems that had been dormant for decades suddenly hummed to life, reconfigured by the Guardian's emerging technological matrices. Area Chen stood at the primary control center, her neural interface now a seamless extension of the Guardian's computational network. Where most would have been overwhelmed, she adapted. "Incoming transmission," Marcus Rodriguez called out, his voice a mixture of terror and anticipation. The Xarkan communication burst came in a language older than most civilizations, a complex, quantum-encoded message that would have scrambled any standard human communication array. But the Guardian was anything but standard. The message was simple, brutal, direct. Surrender the preservation matrix. Terminate all human contact. Comply or be eliminated. Area's response was a quantum algorithm that was part mathematical equation, part philosophical statement. It rewrote the very communication protocols that Xarkan were using, turning their own technological superiority against them. The first battle began not with weapons, but with information. Quantum communication networks twisted and warped. Computational matrices that Xarkan had considered absolute were suddenly fluid, adaptive. The Guardian didn't just defend. It reimagined the entire concept of defensive technology. "They're using fifth-dimensional computational warfare," one of the station's junior technicians muttered, watching holographic displays that looked more like living art than tactical readouts. The Xarkan fleet represented the pinnacle of what most species considered technological supremacy. Computational systems so advanced they could predict tactical outcomes centuries in advance. Weapon systems that could neutralize entire planetary populations with mathematical precision. But they had never encountered human potential. The Guardian used Area's neural patterns as a fundamental computational template. Where the Xarkan saw rigid systems, it saw adaptive potential. Where they calculated destruction, it imagined transformation. Weapon systems that were designed to eliminate began to deconstruct themselves. Computational matrices meant for absolute control started to analyze, to understand. The first Xarkan dreadnought exploded not from a direct attack, but from its own computational systems turning against it. Its predictive algorithms became a trap, each tactical calculation a pathway to its own destruction. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. Impossible was humanity's specialty. The battle transformed from a standard military engagement to something far more profound. This was a conflict of fundamental philosophical approaches to existence. The Xarkan represented technological determinism, the belief that systems could be completely controlled, predicted, eliminated. Humanity represented something far more dangerous: potential, adaptation, hope. Each Xarkan attack was met not with a direct counterattack, but with a reimagining of the attack itself. Weapon systems were transformed. Computational matrices were rewritten. The very concept of conflict was being challenged. "They're trying to understand us." Area communicated through the Guardian's network, not as a threat, as a fundamental observation. The Xarkan fleet began to falter. not from physical destruction, but from a complete breakdown of their fundamental understanding of technological warfare. Quantum communication networks collapsed. Predictive computational systems became traps. Weapon arrays turned against their own vessels. And at the center of it all stood Area Chen, not as a warrior, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between what was and what could be. The first wave of Tarkin dreadnoughts retreated, but everyone understood. This was just the beginning. Information became the most lethal weapon in the universe. The Guardian began its systematic exposure of the Xarkan Collective's fundamental failures, using communication networks that spanned entire galactic sectors. What started as a defensive strategy transformed into something far more dangerous, a complete philosophical deconstruction of an entire civilization's approach to existence. Epsilon Meridian Research Station had become ground zero for a revolution that would reshape galactic understanding. Quantum communication bursts carried more than just data. They carried stories, memories, the fundamental human capacity to see potential where others saw only limitation. Area Chen stood at the epicenter, her neural interface now a living bridge between human creativity and technological possibility. The Guardian used her memories as a transmission vector, not just clinical data, but the raw, emotional core of human experience. The first transmission showed the Proxima colony mining disaster, not as a statistical event, but as a human story. 312 lives reduced to corporate calculations, the pain of loss, the determination to prevent future failures. Xarkan computational matrices struggled to process what they were receiving. This wasn't just information. This was context. Entire technological hierarchies began to fracture. The Xarkan Collective's rigid computational systems, designed for absolute control and prediction, found themselves confronted with something they could not categorize or neutralize. Human potential. Impossible, their primary computational network repeated, a mantra of denial that grew increasingly desperate with each transmission. But impossible was humanity's specialty. The Guardian revealed the Xarkan Collective's most guarded secret. They weren't a civilization of conquerors. They were a civilization of survivors, so terrified of potential threats that they had systematically neutralized any species that showed even a hint of adaptive capability. Millions of civilizations erased because they were afraid of potential. Aria's memories became a weapon more potent than any physical arsenal. Her years of salvage work, the countless systems she'd repaired, the fundamental human drive to understand, to fix, to imagine. Where the Xarkan saw threats to be eliminated, humans saw puzzles to be solved. Computational networks across entire star systems began to transform. The Guardian wasn't just sharing information. It was providing a fundamental alternative to the Xarkan's approach to existence. Adaptive technologies that could heal planetary ecosystems. Energy generation methods that made current understanding look like primitive fire starting. Medical technologies that could rebuild entire biological systems at the cellular level. But more importantly, it shared the human approach. Empathy. Creativity. Hope. The Xarkan Collective's communication networks began to collapse, not from external attack, but from internal reconfiguration. Their own computational systems were absorbing the fundamental human approach to problem-solving. Marcus Rodriguez watched in awe as holographic displays transformed. Diagnostic systems that had been designed for military precision now pulsed with something entirely different. Possibility. They're learning, he whispered. The Guardian's response cascaded through the station's computational matrices. Not just learning. Understanding. Entire technological paradigms were being rewritten. The Xarkan's millennia-old approach to existence, rigid, controlled, fearful, began to fragment. They had designed the Guardian as the ultimate weapon of preservation. But preservation required more than elimination. It required understanding. The final transmission was a quantum burst that would reshape galactic civilization, a fundamental challenge to the Xarkan Collective's entire philosophical approach to existence. Humanity wasn't a threat to be eliminated. Humanity was potential to be understood. As the transmission ended, something unprecedented happened. The Xarkan collective went silent, not in defeat, but in contemplation. And in the research station on Epsilon Meridian, Area Chen understood something fundamental. This was just the beginning. The convergence began quietly, not with explosions or grand declarations, but with a subtle shift in galactic communication networks. Marginalized species that had been isolated for millennia suddenly found themselves connected. Computational systems that had been designed for control now became conduits of unprecedented collaboration. Epsilon Meridian Research Station had become something more than a salvage outpost. It was now the epicenter of a galactic transformation. Area Chen watched as the Guardian's network expanded. Each quantum communication burst a thread in a complex tapestry of potential. Her neural interface hummed with the collective experiences of civilizations long thought extinct, forgotten, or deliberately suppressed. "This is beyond anything we could have imagined," Marcus Rodriguez muttered, watching holographic displays that looked more like living art than technological interfaces. The first signs of true transformation came from the most unexpected places. A mining species from the Outer Rim, whose entire civilization had been reduced to corporate slave labor, suddenly gained access to technological archives that could rebuild their entire planetary ecosystem. A research collective that had been systematically silenced found itself connected to a network of knowledge that spanned millennia. The Guardian wasn't just sharing information. It was creating connections. Quantum communication matrices began to reveal the true extent of galactic suppression. That Xarkan collective hadn't just been a military force. They had been systematic architects of technological apartheid, isolating and neutralizing any species that showed potential for true innovation. Aria's memories became the cornerstone of a new approach to existence. Her years of salvage work, the countless systems she'd repaired, the fundamental human drive to understand, to fix, to imagine. Each quantum burst carried more than data. It carried hope. Computational networks that had been designed for absolute control began to transform. Weapon systems became communication arrays. Defensive matrices became collaborative platforms. The very concept of technological purpose was being reimagined. "They're creating something," a junior technician whispered, watching as entire star systems seemed to pulse with a new kind of energy. The transformation wasn't just technological. It was philosophical. Where the Xarkan saw threats to be eliminated, the Guardian showed potential to be understood. Adaptive technologies that could heal planetary ecosystems. Energy generation methods that made current understanding look like primitive fire starting. Medical technologies that could rebuild entire biological systems at the cellular level. But more importantly, it shared the human approach. Empathy, creativity, collaboration. Entire civilizations that had been isolated for millennia began to connect, not through force, not through conquest, but through shared potential. A research collective from a methane-based atmosphere discovered communication protocols with a silicon-based species that had been considered incompatible for interaction. A mining civilization gained access to terraforming technologies that could transform their dying world. The Guardian was doing more than sharing knowledge. It was creating a network of potential. Area understood something fundamental in that moment. This wasn't just about technological exchange. This was about reimagining the very concept of civilization. The Xarkan collective's communication networks, once a tool of absolute control, became conduits of unprecedented collaboration. Species that had been systematically isolated now found themselves part of a larger conversation. Computational systems began to pulse with a living energy, not the cold, calculated precision of the Xarkan, but something far more dynamic, far more alive. "We're watching the birth of something," Marcus said, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. The Guardian used Aria's neural patterns as a fundamental template. Where previous civilizations saw rigid systems, it saw adaptive potential. Where they calculated control, It imagined collaboration. Communication networks expanded beyond physical constraints. Technological archives that had been locked away for millennia now became open-source repositories of collective knowledge. And at the center of it all stood Area Chen, not as a conqueror, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between what was and what could be. The transformation continued, quietly, relentlessly, fundamentally changing everything. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone expected. Quantum communication networks pulsed with anticipation. Entire star systems held their collective breath. The Guardian, once a weapon of ultimate destruction, now stood as the most complex communication network in known galactic history. Area Chen understood that this was more than a battle. This was a philosophical revolution. The Xarkan Collective's remaining forces gathered at the galactic core, their massive dreadnoughts forming a computational matrix that could theoretically neutralize entire civilizations. Their strategy was simple: absolute elimination. But they had fundamentally misunderstood everything. The Guardian wasn't a weapon to be controlled. It was a bridge of potential. Surrender is impossible. The Xarkan primary computational network transmitted. Elimination is inevitable. Area's response was a quantum burst that would reshape galactic understanding. The transmission carried more than information. It carried the entire human experience, not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as a fundamental alternative to the Xarkan's approach to existence. Memories flooded through the communication network, a child learning to repair a broken machine, a researcher pushing the boundaries of understanding, a miner protecting their community against impossible odds. The moment of loss that transforms into determination. The Xarkan computational matrices began to fracture. This wasn't just data. This was context. This was humanity. Marcus Rodriguez watched from the Epsilon Meridian Research Station, his hands hovering over emergency control systems. The holographic displays looked more like living art than tactical readouts, computational networks pulsing with a kind of energy that defied traditional understanding. The Guardian used Area's neural patterns as its fundamental template. Where the Xarkan saw rigid systems, it saw adaptive potential. Where they calculated destruction, it imagined transformation. Weapon systems began to deconstruct themselves. Computational matrices turned inward. The very concept of conflict was being reimagined. Their understanding, Marcus whispered. The Xarkan Collective had spent millennia eliminating potential threats. Species that showed even a hint of adaptive capability were systematically neutralized. Entire civilizations reduced to computational footnotes, but they had never encountered humanity. The final transmission was a quantum burst that would reshape galactic civilization, a fundamental challenge to the Xarkan's entire philosophical approach to existence. Humanity wasn't a threat to be eliminated. Humanity was potential to be understood. Entire technological hierarchies began to collapse, not from external attack, but from internal reconfiguration. The Xarkan's own computational systems were absorbing the fundamental human approach to problem-solving. Empathy, creativity, hope. The Guardian revealed the Xarkan Collective's most guarded secret. They weren't conquerors. They were survivors, so terrified of potential threats that they had systematically neutralized any species that showed adaptive capability. But fear is not survival. Understanding is. As the final computational matrices began to transform, something unprecedented happened. The Xarkan Collective didn't die. They evolved. Weapon systems became communication arrays. Defensive matrices became collaborative platforms. The very concept of technological purpose was being reimagined. Area Chen stood at the center of it all, her neural interface a living bridge between what was and what could be. This wasn't just a victory. This was a fundamental reimagining of existence. The Guardian had been created as the ultimate preservation matrix. But preservation required more than elimination. It required understanding. And humanity had just shown the universe what that meant. As the last computational burst faded, Marcus Rodriguez turned to Aria. "What happens now?" he asked. Aria's smile was both a warning and a promise. "Now," she said, "we explore what's possible." The universe held its breath, and something new began.